Ned Stark rose before dawn as always, driven by that lingering sense of duty that had marked him so thoroughly since the end of the war. Rubbing the weariness from his eyes, he left the bed he shared with Cersei, though shared might have been too strong a term for their nightly arrangement. They had lain side by side, but a gulf as wide as the neck separated them in spirit. He washed quickly in a basin of lukewarm water, dressed in a simple tunic and breeches, and stepped quietly into the corridor, leaving Cersei still asleep in a tangle of silken sheets. Only a pair of servants in Lannister livery lingered outside the chamber, dozing against the wall until his appearance startled them to attention. He nodded curtly at them, descended the stair, and made his way into the courtyard of the Red Keep. Dawn tinted the sky a subtle pinkish gray, and a breeze from Blackwater Bay carried the tang of salt through the high walls. Several men-at-arms were already sparring in a corner of the yard, their grunts and the clang of steel echoing faintly in the stillness. Ned found an unoccupied spot near the armory, took up a wooden practice sword, and began the fluid motions of a sword drill. He had always preferred practicing with real steel. Wooden swords gave a false sense of weight, but in the capital his every move was watched, and he judged it best to avoid accidents that might raise eyebrows. As the minutes passed, his mind cleared. Each thrust and parry steadied the churn of thoughts that crowded him upon waking. The North that he yearned for, the newly crowned King Robert's boisterous unpredictability, the swirling alliances at court, the child Jon. Even the simple name summoned a tangle of guilt, protectiveness, and memory. He pictured the boy's tiny form, the curious gray eyes, that tuft of black hair. At least the child was thriving, well-fed and tended by Willa, who mothered him as best she could. Lyanna seldom asked to see him in person. Too perilous. But occasionally, she'd send word requesting some small token or gesture to be sure that Jon was safe. Ned always obliged in some subtle manner. The city whispered of Ned's shame while the truth, if revealed, would topple every fragile pillar of peace they had built. So he carried that secret like a second sword, always at his side, always an unspoken threat to the realm's stability. His practice concluded, Ned replaced the wooden sword and took a moment to catch his breath. Through the open courtyard gate, he glimpsed the sun finally cresting the horizon, painting the towers of the red keep a deep reddish gold. He exhaled a long breath and made his way back indoors. The day promised to be busy. He had promised Jon Arryn that he would attend a meeting of the King's Council, where they'd discuss the crown's finances, a dire matter, given that the war had drained the royal coffers. Beyond that, Ned had to find time to finalize certain administrative tasks, rebuilding roads, redistributing property seized from Targaryen loyalists, confirming the new titles for certain lords who had joined the rebellion. The list was endless. Though Ned yearned to be away from King's Landing, he knew his departure was impossible in the short term. Robert had insisted that Ned must stay, not only as a trusted advisor but also as a living symbol of unity. Tywin Lannister had enough influence already. The presence of a Stark among the king's inner circle offered a counterbalance, reassuring those who might fear that the Lannisters would swallow the realm. Ned wished fervently that Robert would learn to govern more diligently, but Robert had never cared for the minutiae of politics, and with Lyanna at his side, both a joy and a constant reminder of the war, he was often absent from council sessions, preferring hunts, feasts, or simply roaming the city to soak in the people's admiration. Near the tower stairs, Ned nearly collided with Varys, the master of whisperers, whose soft slippers made his steps unnaturally silent. The plump eunuch offered a florid bow, hands clasped in front of his robe. His expression radiated polite servility, yet Ned had learned enough to know that Varys's unassuming manner hit a mind sharper than any blade in the Red Keep. "Ah, Lord Stark," Varys cooed, "you are up and about so early. How diligent the wolf is. May I say you are a credit to the realm's stability. Sleep is precious, yet you sacrifice it for the greater good." Ned regarded him quietly. "I train at first light. It's a habit I keep from Winterfell, as expected from the north," Varys said with a smile. "I wonder if you might be interested in a small rumor I have heard about a potential disturbance in Flea Bottom." Ned forced himself not to sigh. Even the smallest rumor had a way of growing into a crisis if left unchecked in this city. What disturbance? Varys stepped closer, lowering his voice. A gang of cutthroats claims to be working in the name of Prince Viserys Targaryen. Nonsense, most likely, but they have begun stirring up trouble. It would be a pity if such rumors spread, sowing fear. Ned frowned. Where exactly? Not far from the Street of Flower. They've caused no real harm yet, mostly petty theft and drunken brawls. But they scrawl Targaryen slogans on walls, whispering that the dragon shall return. Ned paused, recalling how the Targaryen children, Viserys and Daenerys, were rumored to be across the narrow sea. I'll alert the City Watch and the Hand. We don't need these fools disturbing the peace. Thank you, Lord Varys. Varys bowed again. Of course, our new king's reign must remain untroubled, and I know you share that goal. With that, he slipped away, leaving Ned to wonder what angle Varys might be playing. The Master of Whisperers never gave information freely without expecting something in return, even if it was only the intangible currency of trust. Still, the threat of Targaryen loyalists, real or fabricated, had haunted them all since the war's end. For the good of the realm, any overt Targaryen resurgence would have to be checked swiftly. Ned despised the notion of hunting down rumor-driven thugs, but leaving them unchallenged might stoke the embers of rebellion. He continued on, more determined to speak with Jon Arryn before the day's official council meeting. When he reached the corridor outside the Hand Solar, he discovered Ser Barristan Selmy already there, speaking quietly with Jon Arryn's steward. Barristan inclined his head to Ned as he approached. A tall man with white hair and a knightly bearing, Barristan Selmy was one of the most honorable men Ned had ever known. He had served under the Mad King, then under Robert, bridging the two reigns by dint of skill and reputation alone. "My Lord Stark," Barristan greeted. "I was hoping to find the Hand. Have you seen him this morning?" Ned shook his head. "Not yet, Ser Barristan. We must both wait, it seems." They stood together in a companionable silence until the steward stepped aside, indicating that Jon Arryn was ready to see them. Inside, Jon Arryn sat at a large table covered with scrolls and parchments, his face drawn with weariness. Though he had been a father figure to Ned in younger years, each passing month wore on him. His hair had turned a near white, and he looked older than his 50-some years. Still, his blue eyes were sharp, his demeanor measured. "Barristan, Ned," Jon said by way of greeting. "Come, be seated. There's never an end to these tasks." Ned settled into a chair, while Barristan stood formally, hands clasped behind his back. Jon indicated a stack of missives, messages from the Western Lords, praising the realm's unity. Of course, we know they praise Tywin's gold as much as they do the crown, but that's how these things go. Another from the Vale, a minor dispute over a stretch of farmland. And this 1 inch, he tapped a sealed parchment. Arrived from Dorne. Prince Doran Martell sends a cautious acknowledgement of Robert's reign. Nothing more. Ned leaned forward. Tensions with Dorne had lingered like a poison since the end of the war, especially given the fate of Elia Martell and her children during the sack of King's Landing. Does he indicate any willingness to come to court? Jon shook his head. He pledges no overt hostility, but that's all. We must tread carefully there. Any slight might provoke them. I'm keen to avoid further bloodshed, for the realm's sake. Ned noticed Barristan's jaw tighten. The memory of Elia's brutal death was a stain on the new regime's conscience. Gregor Clegane and Amory Lorch, under the Lannister banner, had committed atrocities in the name of securing the city, though the crown had never officially acknowledged the details. Barristan had often lamented that the honor of the Kingsguard had been tarnished by that day. "I can travel to Sunspear if you believe it prudent," Barristan offered, a gesture of good faith. Prince Doran might respond better if a Kingsguard knight delivers the king's personal greetings. Jon rubbed his chin. "Perhaps that's wise, but let me consult the king. He might prefer to send a more diplomatic envoy. As for the realm's finances, well, that's a separate pit of snakes." "Ned, have you had a chance to review the preliminary accounts?" Ned shook his head. "Not yet, my lord. I had something else I wanted to bring to your attention. Varys told me of trouble in Flea Bottom. Some self-styled Targaryen loyalists. We should address it before it grows. Jon nodded. I'll speak to Janos Slint of the City Watch. We can't allow that nonsense to fester. Robert won't be pleased if Targaryen sympathizers are stirring unrest in his city. Barristan's face remained grave. If you'll have no further need of me, Lord Arryn, I'll prepare for the day's duties. When Jon dismissed him, the old knight left in measured strides. Ned watched him go, silently thankful that at least one Kingsguard was the paragon of virtue people imagined the Kingsguard to be. An honorable man, Jon observed, following Ned's gaze. He served the Targaryens for many years, yet he's remained steadfast for Robert. I hope that bridging the old and new can be accomplished so gracefully by others. He leaned back, exhaling. Now, Ned, about the finances. They delved into talk of coin, taxes, and the urgent need to restore trade routes. Tywin Lannister had lent Robert's reign significant gold to start rebuilding. But such loans had strings attached, and the Iron Throne was sliding deeper into debt to House Lannister. Ned could only grimace at that reality. Tywin's generosity was no act of charity. It was an investment in power and influence, a bond that would become all the tighter with each gold dragon drawn from the Lannister vaults. After an hour of numbers and proposals, Ned and Jon parted ways, agreeing to discuss solutions at the upcoming council meeting. Ned headed toward the Queen's apartments. Lyanna had asked for him that morning, sending a courteous note. He could not deny his sister's request, even if the sight of her, so often withdrawn, so often haunted, tugged painfully at his heart. He found her in a small sitting room that overlooked the Blackwater. She was dressed in a gown of deep blue, her dark hair partly braided. Sunlight spilled through tall windows, catching the dust motes in the air. Two of her ladies-in-waiting hovered near the back of the chamber, but Lyanna dismissed them with a gracious nod when Ned arrived. They curtsied and departed, leaving brother and sister alone. Lyanna's smile was soft, tinged with sorrow. Ned, I'm so glad you came. He approached and took her hands gently. I'm sorry I didn't visit sooner. Duty. She shook her head, silencing him. I know. Robert keeps you busy, and you have your own responsibilities. Wife, child. The last word came out carefully, as though it might shatter in her mouth. How fares Jon? He's well, Ned answered, trying to keep his voice gentle. He's growing every day. Soon he'll be strong enough to crawl around the room. The wet nurse dotes on him. She looked away. I wish I could be there to see it. Every time I think of him, She closed her eyes, inhaling shakily. I can't risk it. I know what's at stake. Ned squeezed her hands. I promised you I'd keep him safe. That vow holds, no matter what. If you ever feel strong enough, you could hold him. I could arrange. No, she said firmly, though her voice trembled. Not now. If someone saw, even a hint of a rumor. No, Ned. I can't risk Robert's wrath. Or the realm's. We must stay the course. He nodded, sadness filling him. She was right. Even a single misstep could unravel everything. Lyanna's betrothal to Robert had been the spark that started the rebellion. If the truth emerged that she'd borne another man's child, one who had Targaryen blood, the kingdom would erupt in fury. Robert's claim rested in part on how Rhaegar Targaryen had wronged him by stealing Lyanna away. This new monarchy was fragile enough without secrets that cut at its very foundation. She took a step back, clasping her hands before her. I sent for you because I hoped we might talk about the North, about home. Do you hear from Winterfell often? Ned managed a faint smile. Benjen writes me occasionally. Winterfell stands strong, though the burden of being acting lord weighs on him. He's asked whether I'll return soon, but I have no answer. Not while Robert needs me here. Not while we're still mending the Seven Kingdoms. Lyanna sighed, moving to one of the windows to gaze out over the shimmering water. I miss the North. The crisp air, the forests, the snow on the mountains. King's Landing is stifling. It's warm, noisy, and so full of watchers. Spies, ambition, greed. It is a different world, Ned conceded. And you are queen now. The realm looks to you for guidance. She gave a wry laugh. Queen? Robert would shower me in jewels and feasts if he could, but sometimes I'd prefer a moment of peace. He is kind enough in his way, but you know him. He's loud, he drinks too much, and he indulges the crowd's adoration like a starving man at a feast. I stand beside him, smile, wave, accept compliments. Sometimes I feel as though I'm wearing a mask I can't remove. It may grow easier, Ned murmured, though he wasn't sure he believed it. Robert truly cares for you. That's not a small thing in a royal match. Lyanna turned, meeting his gaze. Yes, he does care, or at least I think so. Sometimes I sense a distance in him as well. Perhaps he sees in me the dream he'd built during the war, a perfect lady. But I'm not perfect, and I fear his illusions might break if he sees me as I truly am. Before Ned could offer any comfort, a knock sounded at the door. Lyanna composed herself, nodding for him to open it. On the other side stood a maid in Baratheon livery, bowing hastily. Your Grace, the maid said, eyes lowered. King Robert is waiting in your solar. He says it's urgent. Lyanna's shoulders tensed. Thank you. I'll go to him. She turned to Ned. We'll speak more soon. Thank you for everything. Ned inclined his head, then stepped aside to let her pass. He left the royal apartments feeling a renewed ache for his sister. Her burdens were as heavy as his own, though in a different shape. At least in the north, she'd had freedom to ride and roam. Now she was Queen Lyanna, trapped in a gilded cage. He prayed she would not break under the weight. By midday, Ned was in the council chamber with Jon Arryn, Petyr Baelish, and Tywin Lannister. Varys slipped in after them, smiling his usual polite smile. Renly Baratheon, Robert's younger brother, was also present, though he seemed more interested in flirting with a scribe than attending to the matters at hand. Grand Maester Pycelle dozed intermittently, roused only when a point of law or tradition was mentioned. Ned forced himself to keep his composure as the meeting began. Tywin sat across from him, silent yet imposing. Sometimes Ned felt that Tywin's mere presence could overwhelm the entire room. The conversation focused on finances first. Baelish, newly appointed as Master of Coin, somewhat to Ned's surprise, outlined the crown's debts. The sums were staggering, though Petyr Baelish's quicksilver tongue made them sound almost trivial. He proposed new taxes on trade from the free cities, some reallocation of tariffs in Gulltown and Lannisport, and the possibility of reopening the mines in the Westerlands to full capacity. Tywin's expression remained stony, but he did not contradict Baelish. Perhaps the Lannisters stood to benefit from increased mining profits anyway. Jon Arryn nodded thoughtfully. If we can tighten the City Watch's budget slightly and reassign some funds from the royal feasts, we might balance the shortfall. You mean cut the quality of Robert's feasts? Renly Baratheon interjected with a grin. Good luck telling him that. He'll roar like a wounded bear. Tywin spoke then, his voice cool and authoritative. His Grace will understand if it's properly explained that the realm's welfare depends on fiscal prudence. In time, he will appreciate a smaller feast if it ensures stability. Ned doubted Robert would be so easily convinced, but he kept his counsel. Next came the matter of the rumored Targaryen loyalists in Flea Bottom. Varys, in his soft voice, confirmed that the City Watch had arrested several ringleaders. Under questioning, though he did not specify how harsh the questioning, the men revealed little more than idle chatter about the lost dragon prince, returning to reclaim the throne. A handful of scum, easily dealt with, Petyr Baelish said, waving a hand dismissively. Ned felt compelled to emphasize caution. All the same, we shouldn't ignore them. If Targaryen supporters do exist, they might look to these street gangs for their first foothold. We need to ensure the Watch remains vigilant. Tywin regarded Ned with an unreadable expression. Yes, Lord Stark is correct. Stamp out the embers before they become a blaze. Jon Arryn made a note. I'll speak to Janos Slynt again. We'll keep them under watch, but I see no reason for panic. Is that all for today, my lords? After a moment, each nodded in turn. The business concluded. They filed out, leaving Ned walking beside Jon Arryn in the corridor. Ned lowered his voice. "Do you trust Baelish as master of coin?" Jon raised an eyebrow. "He's clever, perhaps too clever, but he has a head for figures, and Robert insisted on giving him the post. I'll keep an eye on him. For now, we need competence in finances. Peter is providing that." Ned wasn't fully satisfied, but he let the matter rest. He parted ways with Jon to head back to his own chambers, where, presumably, he'd find Cersei or at least receive any messages she had sent. Indeed, upon arriving, he discovered a Lannister guard stationed outside the door. The guard informed him that the Lady Cersei wished to speak with him privately. Ned braced himself, uncertain what she might want.